Even beyond Vietnam, before Vietnam, they have been updated. In the old days, in Vietnam, they would have been used for those massive carpet bombings. These days, they have those precision weapons, but they are essentially the same airplane, and they are taking off, or they have taken off, towards Iraq, whether it's Baghdad or somewhere else in the country, we don't know. But as they take off, it's about a 6-hour flight, Wolf, as I recall, and we hope that they all get back safely.
You know, Aaron, these B-52s may be old planes, 40, 50-year-old planes, but they have some of the most advanced avionics, some of the most advanced bombing capabilities in the U.S. military arsenal. They're highly reliable, and of course, they're well used in this bombing campaign that is continuing throughout big parts of Iraq. Not only Baghdad, we have cameras in Baghdad, but they're continuing in Mosul, in Kirkuk, in Tikrit, which is the hometown, the home base of Saddam Hussein. The B-52s, an impressive warplane, impressive bomber. They now have a new generation, those B-2 stealth bombers. The B-2 stealth bombers have been deployed closer to the region right now, and they're being used as well.
Of Baghdad was launched. Tonight they were being readied for the next round.
We can take out command and control centers, just about any target. They're very precise, so we can take out just about anything that we are told to.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, executing forward.
Launching forward.
It's the first time most crew members have seen a missile launched in anger. A slow-motion sequence of one launch. Before the latest bombardment, a news blackout is imposed to preserve secrecy because it takes each missile over an hour to reach Baghdad. This warship is one of the superpower Navy's heavy hitters. The Americans have enough Tomahawks to maintain this relentless pressure indefinitely. That's the ground-shaking pattern this weekend. Brian Barron, BBC News, with the US Fifth Fleet.
Forces are closing in on Basra. There have been tank battles, but military commanders say they have no intention of taking it by force. The strategy is to isolate the city and hope Iraqi forces based there will simply give up. 52 bombers have taken off from RAF Fairford. Their destination is unknown. But last night it's believed 8 bombers from the Gloucestershire base took part in the massive attack on the Iraqi capital. Richard Slee, ITV News.
What sort of damage are these Tomahawks likely to do? What would their targets be, do we think?
We'd expect the Tomahawks to be very much associated with strategic targets and perhaps military targets in the vicinity of Baghdad.
When you say military targets, are we talking about personnel here or buildings?
More likely, if it's Tomahawk, to be buildings, other installations, command and control installations, including radio facilities, that sort of thing, rather than personnel or forces actually moving on the ground.
Which is interesting because we've seen 2 B-52 bombers take off earlier this evening, about an hour ago. They're well on their way now to Baghdad, and the speculation has been through the night that possibly they were going to soften up the ground troops, as it were, in advance of the American and British forces that are making their way to Baghdad, taking out some of those hardened Republican Guard troops. If indeed these are Tomahawks that are being launched. Now, these are live, yes, these are library pictures from earlier today when those 2 B-52 bombers were taking off about an hour and a half ago. Now, if those aircraft are going to soften up troops, is it possible then that we're going to see again another daylight attack on Baghdad city itself with these Tomahawks, as you say, being aimed at specific buildings within the city?
It looks as though that's the case. These won't arrive on scene until it's daylight. I don't think they're associated with the sort of shock and awe that we saw 24 hours ago. That's more likely to happen at night.
Of shock and awe, and that's a time period that will end at 1 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. There will be 3,500 total sorties 1,500 of those in the last 24 hours. Of those 1,500, 800 are strike sorties using bombs or missiles. The others are on support missions. A total of 500 aim points in this 24-hour period. Now, aim points are different than targets. One target can have more than one aim point. A presidential palace could have dozens of aim points. So they're looking for 500 aim points in this 24-hour period. According to these sources, aircraft tonight are pounding, this is a quote, pounding on Republican Guard forces. And there's increased emphasis on the western portion of Iraq in the last 24-hour period.
In Baghdad, it was targeting primarily something called the Special Security Organization. Now, this is about 1,500 men who are the core tool by which Saddam Hussein polices his senior generals. So the idea was, by hitting them, to create the space again for those senior generals to move against the regime to trigger a coup. So I think I would argue
But if that's the aim, Dr. Dodge, if that's the aim, then what must be pretty worrying for the coalition is the kind of resistance that they've encountered in southern Iraq, well away from the center of power in Baghdad.
Well, exactly. I think we could suggest that there is an idea of Iraq, and indeed the Iraqi state, amongst American planners, that barring 60 or 70 people at the very top, the rest of the country is against Saddam, which may be true, but for the United States, which may not be. And what we're seeing is tenacious resistance by the 5th Division at Nasiriyah, and more resistance as the American army move up the country. So I would suggest that possibly what we're seeing is Iraqi troops not necessarily fighting for Saddam Hussein, but fighting for Iraqi nationalism. And we see behind the army, journalists coming up behind the army who aren't actually embedded with US forces, finding a great deal of resentment amongst ordinary people, saying, what are you doing here? Are you here to steal our oil? So I think there is more resistance.
Do you think that this is a country that's likely to fragment then afterwards?
No, I don't think so. I think conversely, what I'm describing, an Iraqi nationalism, will keep the country together, but it may well mean that the reception of American troops isn't as liberated. It may well be more ambiguous than that.
Navy SEALs, Marines, all working in a combined operation to basically quickly seize the port and move north into the Basra area as well, and the British securing the Al Faw Peninsula.
And we see now one at least beginning to taxi along the runway. They tend to take off in pairs. We've seen this now the past couple of days, particularly yesterday. It was also about this time that we saw the B-52s taking off, heading for Iraq. We know that they did take part in the huge night of bombing 2 nights ago in Baghdad.
You can hear the engines whining there as they go up and down on the throttle, taxiing very slowly, perhaps for takeoff, perhaps for rearming, perhaps for refueling. We don't know as yet, but as you're saying, Maxine, clearly when we've seen these pictures before on Friday and Saturday, they were a prelude to a major bombing over Baghdad and, of course, other parts of Iraq.
It's not just the sheer size of this plane, it's also the psychological effect it can have. It can carry an enormous amount of munitions, but it's the psychological effect of a B-52 kick off.
And Major General Sir Patrick, accordingly, you're saying that unlikely these planes would be used to attack cities. They probably targeting troops.
No, what I was really thinking was that if we do get resistance from the Republican Guard on the south of Baghdad, they, as far as I'm aware, have not yet had these B-52s visit them. And of course, if there is this resistance, and I think the Americans are very much hoping that the message will get through and they'll actually give up before this is necessary, but the thought of these B-52s there being able to strike them with enormous accuracy this time round must be very concerning.
But as we've been seeing in the fighting in places like
this, and just a few minutes ago, Raghi Omar in Baghdad had to leave us as the air raid sirens there were wailing once again. RAF Fairfield in Gloucestershire here. Another day, another B-52 bomber going off. We're not sure what's happening now. Though we're waiting for to see if any more go, because Dermot, they were going in twos. There's another
They
one
do go
going
in
now.
pairs to fly
There's
these
another one.
sorties, usually then in groups of 6, heading no
another one
doubt
going.
for a location in the Middle East. And as you were saying, Maxine, truly is an awesome sight as they lift off into the murk there, fully laden with fuel and ordnance.
I think John Sopel is still with us. John, are you there?
Yeah, I can. I mean,
You can hear us, right? We've just been watching. Two of the bombers have now taken off. We're just going to stay with these pictures while we talk to you.
Longer than expected. These were US Marines in action this morning. Days after they thought they'd captured this Iraqi port, small numbers of Iraqis were still holding out.
Gas, gas, gas!
A false alarm, but precautions had to be taken. Specialist Iraqi troops have apparently been deployed in the area.
They were inserted probably to just put some backbone into the troops, which they were clearly unsuccessful in doing, and this is just them fighting themselves. There'll come a point where they recognise that there's no point in carrying on. But, you know, for the moment, they fight fiercely, but only in small groups.
Well, here's the latest picture of the US-led invasion of Iraq. In the second city of Basra, British forces say Iraqi defences on the outskirts have been overcome. Meanwhile, the main column of US-led tanks and infantry has been pushing north towards Baghdad, and they've encountered some resistance near the holy city of Najaf. Burning oil wells have been seen in several places, reportedly set ablaze by Saddam's forces. But it's not the inferno some had feared. Iraq's southern oil fields are largely in US and British hands, but the battle for Baghdad may still be to come. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Traffic on a bridge across the River Tigris came to a standstill as local civilians and then heavily armed soldiers came to investigate. They opened fire with AK-47s into reeds on the shore bank. British and American commanders say they've no reports of any planes being shot down.
Coming under Iraqi fire, the US Marines under British command trying to secure the strategically important port of Qasr. They encountered more resistance than they'd expected. Javelin missiles were fired into the houses, followed by assault from 4 American tanks. What had started as a small skirmish became a 4-hour battle. The British officer in charge says plans must always adapt.
Well, quite frankly, the minute you cross the start line, that's when the script runs out. You can't guess what the enemy are going to do.
Iraqi return fire stopped. The job was finished from the air. Strikes by an American F-18 and a British Harrier jet.
Once we realized that we were dealing with a lot larger force than we expected, we started putting up our observation posts. They started relaying information and really started bringing the combined arms into effect in order to get control of the situation.
A US Patriot missile battery was responsible for shooting down an RAF aircraft close to the Kuwaiti border, it's been confirmed. Coalition forces are now searching for the missing aircraft and its 2-man crew. The Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon this morning expressed sympathy for the families. The latest loss follows the deaths of 7 aircrew, 6 British, 1 American, when 2 Sea King helicopters collided mid-air on Saturday. On Friday, 8 British servicemen died when their US Sea Knight helicopter crashed in northern Kuwait. The losses have marred what's otherwise been described as rapid advances by coalition forces. Sue Saville, ITV News.
Surprised by just how much fighting back has been going on. What's happening is there are Iraqi tanks embedded all the way down this road, dug into the sand. Also, there are grenades, rocket-propelled grenades on the back of 4-wheel drive. They're using the university in Basra itself as a cover because they know that can't be hit because civilians, and coming out and hitting the British whenever they can. They haven't luckily had any success in doing that because the command centre here, where I am, is busy firing mortars back, and they've got their Challenger tanks out there, and you can see the pall of black smoke, which is an Iraqi tank that's been taken out. And there are soldiers like these guys in the bunker behind me who are taking it literally in shift to go back up to the front line and to fight and then come back and get a bit of rest. It will be quite a long time, I think, before we're actually in Basra itself. It's going to be a long slog.
Watching over burning oil fields, these British troops were the first to enter the country, but until yesterday hadn't even encountered Iraqi resistance. After sundown, everything changed. It was all hands to the deck. Iraqi artillery were firing in the area and getting closer with every shot. Proof that hostile forces were not yet spent.
Just over an hour ago, we came under attack by Iraqi artillery. After bombarding them with 105mm rounds, they're now either in retreat or immobilized.
The empty ammo tins stacked up. This was counter-attack on a large scale. Artillery against artillery, it was a simple battle for ground.
Let's get it sorted out, guys. Let's get the ammunition sorted. Get ready to engage again.
A jammed round put one gun out of action, not enough to endanger the fire mission.
What they have seen is remaining troops closing in on one specific building, and they're all now flying the white flag. All right, so that's the end of that small battle.
Today, the guns are still firing at Iraqi positions. Even outside the cities, this war is not a walkover. Philip Ray Smith, ITV News, Southern Iraq.
A lot of boats, you can see them over there on the right of your screen. CNN's Tom Mentier is in Doha, Qatar. He is at CENTCOM headquarters. Tom, as we look at these pictures, what is it that has been said by military officials there, coalition heads?
Well, they have gone on the record, Jim, saying that denying a report that a coalition airplane had been shot down over Baghdad. Also from the U.S., General Myers saying that all coalition planes reported safe at this point. So that story is still circulating in Baghdad. We're seeing the searches that have gone on, but here at CENTCOM headquarters and apparently at the Pentagon, they are saying that all coalition aircraft have returned safely, that no planes or pilots have been shot down, that this story simply is not true. Now, earlier in the day, they were telling me privately that each time there is an accusation or an assertion from the Iraqis that coalition forces have been shot down anywhere in Iraq, they simply are not going to come out and deny each one individually. But we have had denials from CENTCOM and from the Pentagon that say that no plane was shot down, that all coalition aircraft have returned from their missions safely, and that the story of the pilots ejecting simply is not true if you believe what they are saying both here in Doha and in Washington at the Pentagon.
We're assessing the situation here. There are people running up and down with messages. They've got binoculars on the area, but this situation has not come to a halt yet. This is ongoing. It is not yet declared safe. I tell you, I overheard, and you can probably hear that those shadowy figures, they've got eyes on them, as they say here now. Mike, do you feel you're safe enough there? Mike Donnelly, my cameraman, do you feel you're safe enough where you are? He says so. You probably saw that, Simon. It's a difficult call. We're trying to cover the war here, but at the same time, as I say, this is not a soap opera. It's not being done for television. It's being done to carry out the mission here. We're simply bystanders. We're tagging along. It is not easy to operate in these conditions when there is nobody firing at you. It is more difficult, of course. Adrenaline will be pumping. There is a life-threatening situation here. So it's very, very difficult to operate in these conditions, certainly for the soldiers. Marginally less so for us, obviously, because we're just a few yards back from what is de facto the front line. But it's very hot, very difficult, very dusty, and the sand, as you know, and dust gets into everything. I just ask you what's happening.
Roger, right now we just got a confirmation that we've got some pop shots. I guess somebody's trying to return fire with the tanks onto the tanks over. I believe the first tank's about to take a shot right now. There we go. Apparently there's
engines being revved up. We do know that some did take off early hours of this morning, perhaps 2:30 or so. 6 hours flying time to Iraq. The B-52 bombers, of course, have been a mainstay of the campaign over the past 5 days.
And as we watch those pictures of the planes being loaded up, let's go live to Baghdad. That, presumably, could be the objective of their mission as they take off, although the bombing does seem to be pretty widespread around the country, given the figures by the Iraqis this morning.
British Army
but far from safe. Basra airport is now secured. The foot patrols know that the ground around could be mined, and the snipers remain a serious threat. The ultimate goal is the southern port of Basra, but the Iraqis, with their limited weapons, aren't giving up without a fight. The mortars have been busy all day. Their fire is being directed at Iraqi tanks dug in along the main highway. But at one stage, the company commander called for more American air support.
Chris, on top, we've got a Wild Eagle mission coming in to have a look in depth.
Yes.
Have you got it yet?
No.
It's tougher going than the British expected. Tanks are being targeted by machine guns mounted on the back of civilian pickup trucks. With their overwhelming combat power, the coalition are winning. The decimated remains of Iraqi armour litters the road.
We left Basra as we arrived in a two-lane convoy which stretched back for miles. Evidence of Saddam Hussein's mischief dominated the horizon. I counted half a dozen oil fields burning out of control, their choking plumes an eerie reminder of the last Gulf War. Protecting the remaining oil wealth in this region was the Marines' main concern. Having done so, they swiftly moved on northwards, anxious to avoid an early urban conflict. This vast convoy is bearing down on Baghdad. Hundreds of heavily armed American Marines are planning to lay siege to the capital. But before that, they're expecting much more resistance than they encountered on the way into Basra. Initially, the response was warm. These farmers had clearly never seen such an awesome display of military might and made little secret of their contempt for the Iraqi leader.
Saddam Hussein.
Out.
Okay.
But later there was trouble ahead. A group of heavily armed Iraqi soldiers was spotted and the convoy came to a halt. At dawn, the search was on for pockets of resistance which few anticipated so early in the conflict and so far from Baghdad. David Willis, BBC News, with the...
The Iraqis claim to have shot down 2 Apaches. The Americans say they've lost 1. It's just the latest in a series of propaganda and military setbacks to the Allied forces in Iraq. And it's one the Iraqis made the most of.
Therefore, we will continue showing whatever of their mercenaries which fall in our hands, and we are adhering fully to the Geneva Convention.
In almost every area, day 5 of the war has seen unexpectedly tough resistance to the Allies' advance. Here in Nasiriyah, US Marines ran into a firefight on the road to Baghdad. Today, sandstorms further delayed their progress. Morale among troops and back home wasn't helped by the capture of 5 American soldiers from the Maintenance Corps, paraded and interviewed on Iraqi television. A propaganda coup. In southern Iraq, there are pockets of resistance, and 2 British soldiers are missing, the first casualty among British forces. But Qasir saw overnight fighting, and Basra has not yet been taken.
Over the weekend, we've seen a consolidation of early gains on the ground and a significant push northwards, complemented by a continuation of precisely targeted air and cruise missile strikes. Southern Iraq is broadly under the control of coalition forces, and the US Army's 5th Corps and the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force have continued north at a steady rate of progress.
Despite the hold-ups, it appears the Allied game plan is still in place. But the big test is yet to come as coalition forces face the Republican Guards at the gates of Baghdad.
Yeah, Nick, well, this is the city of Nasiriyah. You can see it there burning behind me. The Americans said on Saturday night they had this place secure and under their control. I've been in the city this morning. I can assure you it is not. They are barely on the outskirts of it. They have control of one only of the 2 bridges. Now, the reason they've got to fight for this place is those bridges. It is the main route up north here. They need to get artillery and heavy armour up there for the fight for Baghdad, which means they can't simply skirt round this place. What they did was send a battalion battalion, a heavy battalion of US Marines into the southern part of the city to try and win control of it. They have become comprehensively bogged down, and it now appears are pulling out. The local civilian population are being warned with loudspeaker broadcasts to move away from their homes or to get into shelter, because either an air or an artillery barrage is coming their way to try and crush this resistance here. The street fighting has been very intense all morning. There has been volley after volley of heavy artillery coming in from the American side, very accurate mortar fire coming back from the Iraqi side. We were caught up. We were with one unit this morning going into the southern outskirts of the city. We stayed in one place for 10-15 minutes only, and in that time some very accurate mortar fire started coming down and on and around us. Fortunately no one was hurt, but we made a very, very hasty exit out of there. That is absolutely typical of what these Marines are having to fight here getting into that city.